Recording. Recording has started.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. This is the last of our lunchtime series on natural resources and urban forest. And today we have Dr. Chris Irwin from the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Georgia talking about environmental education for the urban environment. All of these presentations are being recorded and will be available on the Forestry Webinars website shortly. I would remind you that if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A tab that is just to the left of the chat tab in your Zoom screen. With that, I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thanks so much, Dr. McCarty. I appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody today. Talking about environmental education is something near and dear to my heart, and I really feel very blessed to have been working in this area for my career. So today, what I'd like to do is review just a few of the significant events that really shaped environmental education. And then I want to talk about these particular curricula: Project Learning Tree, or commonly referred to as PLT, Project Wild, and then Project WET, Water Education Today. That might be new to some of you who are familiar with Project WET. It used to be called or referred to as Water Education for Teachers, but recently they just changed that to Water Education Today. And then finally, I'd like to wrap up and talk about why these three great curricula are excellent for the use in urban environments, urban, suburban, rural, it doesn't matter, but particularly urban environments. And that's the focus of today. Just a little bit about myself, just so you know where I'm coming from. I've been involved with environmental education for over 20 years and have delved into this not only from a non-formal but formal perspective as well. And in the non-formal arena, in essence, the advanced training for environmental education in Georgia is a NAAE, or North American Association for Environmental Education, accredited program. It was the first program in the United States to be accredited by the NAAE, and we are very proud of that here in Georgia. I've also served on the executive board of the Georgia Environmental Education Alliance. I was president and vice president, and also my involvement with the ATEAG program. That was an initiative of EEA, and I worked with the board to make that happen as well. Here at the University of Georgia, Warnell School, I teach a environmental education focused service learning course. It's called Foundations of Environmental Education, where clients actually are identified and the student teams work with those clients to resolve an issue related to environmental education. This photo is actually a picture of the class last year with their client. The lady in the blue jacket is the client, and the student is behind her. I'm also co-director of the Environmental Education Certificate here at the University of Georgia. It's an 18-hour credit program that the students cover the grounds of, from content knowledge to pedagogy, teaching strategies. They have 3 hours of that. And they also do evaluation and assessment. We use a capstone course to finish that certificate off. We ask that students go out and teach a session, lesson, activity, record it, actually record themselves doing it. And then my colleague and I, we review those videos and give those students feedback. And students really find that to be a lot of fun. I'm the state co-coordinator for Project Learning Tree as well. And I work with the National Project Learning Tree program and author a STEM Strategies publication for their national newsletter called The Branch. And it's also available on their website. So a little bit of background just to know, just so you know, and hopefully understand where I'm coming from. So the two significant events that really shaped environmental education in the US and what we're following today are the Belgrade Charter and the Tbilisi Declaration. So we could talk history for more than an hour, but probably for more than a day, but let's just cover it in a few minutes here. And the Belgrade Charter really it suggests that environmental education should provide skills and attributes needed to be a productive person towards improving life and protecting the environment. And it also places heavy emphasis on solving current problems as well as future ones. And this is the Declaration. Remember, 1975, what it did was kind of set ethical values and identify that education is part of, when you connect ethical values with education to protect the environment, that's what we need to do. And this kind of set the frame for it. And this is an international document. The Tbilisi Declaration, it was the first international intergovernmental conference on environmental education organized by United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO. And also the United Environment Program was involved, and they convened this session in Tbilisi, Georgia, in Russia, not Georgia, United States. And in 1977, and that set forth the framework and the principles and the guidelines for environmental education at all levels, from local backyards to international issues. And it set it also for all age groups, both formal classroom and non-formal nature centers, etc. What's really important is that it set forth these 5 objectives that you see on the screen: awareness, knowledge, attitudes, skills, and participation, which I often refer to as action. So it's really important that we are able to provide awareness. That gives an individual the sensitivity to the environment, some kind of knowledge, and typically knowledge gained through some experiential learning activity: hands, mind, thinking, talking, problem solving. We also want to change people's attitudes or have an impact on them, that they have a confidence and a feeling of concern towards the environment. Finally, in skills to identify and solve those problems. And then finally, the ability to engage that individual, to encourage them to be involved and find resolution to issues and problems, working with others to do so. So that Tbilisi Declaration and these 5 objectives still remain today and guide the practice and the profession of environmental education. The 3 big curricula that I feel are important to talk about, and that's why I'm here today, is Project Learning Tree, Project Wild, and Project Wet. Let's take a look at how these have evolved through the last several decades. We'll take PLT first. Project Learning Tree, the roots of it literally began with a collaboration at the American Forest Institute and the Western Region Environmental Education Council. And in 1976, PLT published its first activity guide. Some of my colleagues still have theirs. I was not involved with PLT at that time, but it certainly isn't fun to see these old guides and look at them and see how we've come since 1976 to today. It's amazing the changes. In 2005, PLT revised their guide at the national level. And the changes that we went through to get there are quite interesting, and to see how the view of environmental education was changing and how things were being done in schools and constraints in schools really shaped what we did. In 2010, PLT produced the Early in Childhood Guide, and it's been very successful. Here in Georgia, we are involved with Bright from the Start, and many states have connected their early childhood curriculum with their early childhood development centers around their state. In 2015, the Southeastern Forest and Climate Change module was published. It has produced a lot of positive results in terms of giving teachers and nature center instructors and others the ability to talk about climate change in a way that is unbiased and engages the student in thinking about these issues that they're going to be facing. In 2017, Project Learning Tree was moved from the American Forest Foundation to the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. And that's when we also produced our first e-units, our electronic units. And we grouped these by grade level. It was very efficient to do this, and it was needed and necessary at the time. And then in 2019 and 2020, I want to bring your attention to the fact that our materials in PLT have won the Teacher's Choice Award. In 2019, it was Energy and Ecosystems. And in 2020, it was for our carbon and climate modules. These are available on the website from the PLT National Office, but we are very proud of Project Learning Tree's achievements for winning awards at the national level and being recognized as quality environmental education materials. Oops. Project Wild is the next curricula I'd like to talk about. And while Project Wild was born about the same time as PLT, it took a while for Project Wild to really gain traction as finding some group of individuals to make it happen. So when PLT came out in 76, Project Wild was first published in 83. And that was a terrestrial guide. And in 87, they developed their aquatic wild guide. Major revisions in 2000, as always, just like PLT, and you'll see with Project WET, revisions are always constant in any type of instructional design activities. So if you don't revise, you're not keeping up with the times. One milestone I thought was interesting in 2006, that Project Wild had trained actually over 1 million people, but that was just the year that they identified that happening. And like PLT, Project Wild got their early childhood, which is called Growing Up Wild, publication out, and ours for PLT was in 2010. They got theirs done in 2009, and it's very successful as well. It's quality material. Like Project Learning Tree, Project Wild also was transferred, and they are now with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, or commonly referred to as AFWA. And again, like Project Learning Tree, new terrestrial and aquatic activity guides were released in 2018. So keeping up with the times is very important. Project WET. By chance, does anybody think to yourself, know what's going on in this photo? Yeah, that's a river and it's on fire. The Cuyahoga River in 1969 was on fire, and people were very concerned. It wasn't the first time it burned, but it definitely was a very significant event, and it was so polluted. Problems. This really was brought to their attention when water was on fire. Yep. But then there were other things going on. Earth Day, 1970. Clean Water Act, 1970. And in the mid 70s, PLT was offered. And then early 80s, Wild was also released. Then late 80s, 1989, Project WET was created. It was in one state only at the time, but over the next several years, into early mid 90s, they really expanded out to the states. And then by 2005, they were in all 50 states in 19 countries. Much like PLT and Wild, they too revised their activity guides, and they released their newest one in 2011. So why use these curricula? That's what we're here to talk about. Why are we going to use these in the urban environment? Well, one, they're tested and approved. When you look at one of the guides, you'll see that they have listed the field testers, the pilot testers, and the hundreds of teachers and non-formal educators who have been involved in the creation and maintenance of these curricula. It's really amazing. All three curricula encourage learners to get outside to explore. That is so important that we don't just stay inside and read about it. Let's go outside and do it and learn about it, feel it, taste it, know it. I'm sure many of you have seen when a young person who has not been outside really gets to experience that first butterfly landing on their head, or watching flies and other pollinators fly around flowers and do their thing. It's really fun and amazing. All three programs are interdisciplinary, and that's really key. We don't focus just on science. It's social studies, it's language arts, it's physical education at times. It's many things at one time, and that's what is so amazing about these three curricula, that they can bring in multiple disciplines and achieve it through what's almost considered play or activity that is not really viewed sometimes as learning, traditional learning, sitting in a classroom, raising your hand, being quiet. Let's get outside and have fun and laugh and run and explore. It's important. There's one of the key factors about these curricula also is that it fosters critical thinking and problem solving. We want to help people be able to not tell them what to think, but how to think, how to solve problems, share with them the ability, the skills to solve problems through critical thinking. So that's really the key there. And most importantly, it doesn't require a forest, a wilderness, a river. The urban environment is rich with opportunities to use these curricula, and it's up to the educator, the guide, to interpret what's saying in these activity guides, how to do it, and then applying that to the situation that the educator's in, be it a urban schoolyard. It could be that you're downtown New York. There are things that individuals can do even in that situation where you don't have any green space, but just being outside itself, it'll work. Let's look at these guides a little bit more in depth. So actually, just last month, the brand new 2021 Environmental Education Guide for Project Learning Tree came out. It will be available to all state coordinators for delivery, probably in paper guide by the 1st of June, but that it's also going to be an online product as well. They reconfigured. They had 96 activities in the previous guide. It's been pared down to 50, and many of them are geared towards the urban environment. I have yet to review this thoroughly. I couldn't give you exact details, but it's a really high quality product. And it stresses the idea of getting students to take observations and collect data of many types, but that's the whole goal here. product from Project Learning Tree that is explicitly for the urban forest is Discover Your Urban Forest. It's a middle grade 6 to 8 activity guide, and they want in this guide to help get the youth out there to explore, look at their environment, and consider the issues that are going on at the time in their area. And look at landscapes. What's some people take for granted, I think, when they are walking down their neighborhood sidewalk, that this is the neighborhood and that's where my friend Johnny lives and that's where Uncle Bob lives. But we don't take time to really listen and stop and smell the roses, as they say. So discover the value of different landscapes to appreciate that this urban landscape we have and it's growing has value, but you have to stop and look for it. These activities are very flexible. They're designed with a theme-based series, and I think this is really important. But again, very targeted. Discover the Urban Forest, grade 6 to 8 activities from Project Learning Tree. Some of you may be familiar with iTree. It's an app that the Forest Service created, but we worked with the Forest Service and created actually activities for them so that students discover and really almost analyze trees. The activities in this guide do require students to collect data and put it into the online app that iTree's been made available, and to get information back, such as the value of trees, the identification of the tree, measure and assess the health of trees, the information returned to the students, and can help them maybe develop a plan to improve their street trees, their trees in their campus, school campus, or in their own yard. It's a lot of fun, and students have enjoyed this a lot. A couple of high school modules that are really great for the urban environment. Places We Live. Place-based education puts those students right at ease in their own home, in their own community. And it's so important that they start there, to expect every individual that they're going to go on and move away or go have the opportunity to experience another environment from, example, I grew up in Kansas, didn't see the ocean until I was 21. That was a new experience for me. And that's what I mean. Let's learn about our own spot before we go out and really force this issue. If you don't understand where you live, you can't understand others. It builds a great connection as well by doing this with that internal, that small connection within their own environment. It's also Places We Live is a way to explore current and future issues that are facing these individuals. Municipal solid waste is really, I think, one of the unique curricula that PLT has had to look at waste management strategies and solutions. It is something that we don't really think about too often. And the issues surrounding what happens when you throw your paper in the trash versus recycling, what happens? And that's really important for students to know where their waste goes. And so I said, these are high school modules. They have fewer activities in these guides, but they're designed to be extended over several class periods, and basically a deeper dive, if you will, on issues and matters related to the content. All right, I'm going to switch gears now into Project Wild and look at these. Project Wild, it's all about conservation education of our wildlife and natural resources. And much like PLT and all environmental education, it's to promote responsible action. And that action just happens to be focused on wildlife. lots of field investigations, and this content has strong STEM connections, and they also address careers, which I will say that so do PLT and Project WET have STEM connections and careers. One of the fun activities is in Project Wild in this guide is urban nature search. And it asks the students basically, what's wild in the city? And it is geared towards getting the students to explain how people and wildlife share the urban environment and what are these interactions that go on. So it's a fun activity that is in Project Wild Terrestrial Guide. A couple other materials they have. Flying Wild. It's all about birds, and that's great. Birds can be seen most everywhere. Over 40 activities in this guide, and basically talking about migration, habitats, and what we can do to help birds. Lots of fun activities that involve language arts and social studies, as well as science. But you know, getting the students just to put up bird feeders and observe what species come to the feeders during what time of the year, what's the abundance of an individual species, and then compare that to others. So lots of ways to get the students to collect data, examine the data, synthesize, and what does it mean to them? What's their role in it? Growing Up Wild is the activity guide, much like our early childhood. They came out in 2009, and it's basically just, you know, ages 3 to 7, cognitive development is going on. That is why. They ask why. Young people, we all ask why. Well, that's why. Let's build on their sense of wonder. Let's help them answer why, or experience why things happen, what's going on there. So very active engagement with 27 activities, and those activities then have additional experiences and recommendations to extend an individual activity by doing something. As I mentioned earlier, it's aligned with Head Start Child Development and also USDA My Plate guidelines. So healthy lifestyles are promoted, and that's important as well. Going to move now to Project WET. They are focused on water. And with 63 activities, students are, in general and as a whole, they discover their role in the hydrologic cycle. You know, it's really important. It's a sense of place. But where does my water come from? And it also gets them to think about, how much water do I use? A lot of activities will be data collection on wastewater and other activities they do on a daily basis. And we want students to learn and recognize that water is connecting us all. There's no boundaries to water. It goes from county to county, state to state, mountains to the sea. We all know that. Couple of activities in this guide is one's a rainy day hike. Gets students to ID the watershed where the school is located, or themselves, they could do it for their home. And where does their water come from? And it uses research and investigation and recommends actions that they can take to reduce the amount of pollution from their home, from the schoolyard, etc., into the watershed. So a couple other activities. Amazing Water is kind of these amazing tricks that go on with water. And then there's an activity called Urban Waters. The Urban Watershed Guide, and it's a supplement to the WET curriculum, It was created in Georgia for teachers in Atlanta and other metro areas, actually. And this guide focuses strictly on the urban watershed, what's going on, ask students to understand, where does water come from? And what is the urban watershed? What's the difference between natural watersheds and man-made watersheds? Very focused curriculum, but full of activities like Project Learning Tree and Project Wild. Project Wet also has a early childhood, and it's called Getting Little Feet Wet. 11 activities, and again, not heavy on the cognitive aspects of it, but rather just the exploration. I think this picture says it all, that kids are having fun just out playing around, and what are the properties of water and the sounds of water. Very engaging guide. The River of Words program is free. It's sponsored by Project Wet and others, but it allows K-12 students to express their feelings, their knowledge, whatever their ability, through poetry and art. And it's amazing, some of the drawings. Here's the drawing that was submitted. And it's so important that we allow this aspect of learning to be evidenced, and it follows the concepts and guidelines of EE in terms of learning theory. So connections of science through art, and it's very popular and amazing. Check it out on the web. Just type River of Words and you'll see some of the products that students have created. Discoverwater.org is an interactive web page, and if you go onto this website, you'll see what I didn't want to demonstrate it for fear that it would fail, and that just causes problems. So discoverwater.org, a fun activity in there is Blue Planet. It allows a student to play this video, and they stop the world spinning and they collect data. Was there cursor on water or land? Spin the globe 25 times and then figure out, based on those 25 points of data, how accurate is it to the estimated that there's 72% water, that our Earth is covered by water. Of 72% of Earth is covered by water. So it's just a fun way for them to do that. Check it out. It's really fun. So in a short time, I wanted to also apply the objectives of environmental education and carry you from awareness to action. So the awareness that I tried to demonstrate for you today is Project Wild, Wet, and PLT are perfect for the urban environment. The knowledge phase, I wanted you to understand that these three curricula have the power to educate and engage all learners at all levels, and it's there at your fingertips, ready to go. Attitudes, I hope that I've increased your confidence in the power of these materials, and it's evidenced through the quality of these materials, award-winning, international, and across all 50 states and outside in many countries. The skill level that I wanted to impart was that you can contact your state coordinators, and that's really important. All you have to do is type Project Learning Tree, Project Wet. Go to the websites on the first slide I sent you that are in this presentation, and you can find out who your state coordinator is, or contact me and I'll help you. Also, I think you need to be feeling confident that you can volunteer in your local youth education centers like Boys and Girls Club. get out there and use these curricula to engage the young learners. So what will you do? What's the action component of your next step? So we have A, awareness, K, knowledge, A, attitude, S, skill, and A for action or participation as outlined in the Tbilisi Declaration. I use the word action. If you look at this, at those bold letters, it spells a casa. Yeah, not correctly spelled using Spanish, but the house. And think of it that way and you'll always be in good shape. So with that, thank you. I have
Thank you.
no other pieces of information.
If you will please put your questions in the Q&A section, and I'll start with the first question. How has PLT, Project WET, and/or Project WELL adapted activities or curriculum for teachers and educators to facilitate a virtual environment as opposed to large in-person student groups?
There are many activities online that you can download and view. We have virtual trainings from these PLT's done a lot more in terms of providing virtual trainings. So that's one side. But COVID came and hit us all pretty quick. There are several activities online, but it's not designed to be virtual. And that's up to the educator to figure out what are their constraints from their technology side to their skill and confidence level. But we're trying our best to move towards that level of having it virtual or in person.
All right, I noticed that somebody raised their hand. Unfortunately, we can't unmute you for you to speak. So if you could please put your questions in the Q&A section. That is the little word bubble right next to the chat. It's located just to the left. So we'll give just a few more seconds to see if anybody else has a question. Chris, I have a question. What kind of engagement do these programs have within our state in Georgia?
Here in Georgia, we're very engaged. The 3 state coordinators, actually there's 5 state coordinators, 2 for PLT, 2 for WILD, and 1 for WET. We're engaged across the board. We work at the state level with our Georgia Environmental Education Alliance. Many of us are involved with the executive level down through membership and providing educational training. The ATIG program here in Georgia involves both WILD and WET coordinators as well, and state PLT coordinators. So we're engaged in training new people. We're also engaged at the public level, which is our state association. Constantly doing workshops together. We hold facilitator workshops together. We communicate regularly, but I think that's the case across all states. A lot of state coordinators for PLT, WILD, and WET, they work hand in hand. Some are wearing 2 hats. That'll be PLT and WILD, or et cetera. Mm-hmm.
Someone has requested that you display that first slide that has information on it. And there was another question about where do we find the recordings to the webinars. If you go to Forestry Webinars, there's a section for live webinars and on-demand webinars. So it'll be on the on-demand section, and those are all of the recorded webinars.
I think, were they looking for
I think it was the first slide that you referenced back to.
The websites?
Yeah.
Okay, there are the web pages for each of those.
All right, and we have had a couple more questions come in.
All right.
Okay, we got that. I missed the beginning of the presentation. Do you have to go through training to use the PLT, et cetera, materials?
Not anymore. You can find Project Learning Tree materials online. You can go to Amazon and buy the books. I don't recommend it unless you're a seasoned educator and feel confident in using the materials. But a lot of these materials you can find online. People are selling them. So no, you don't have to go through the training.
Right. Well,
we encourage you to, because we try to help individuals learn how to be good environmental educators and how to use the materials and how to adapt the materials. That's so important. Oftentimes it's misunderstood that these guides are set up to be, it's assumed that it's step 1, step 2, step 3. These are guides, not exact recipes, like a baking recipe that is science, that you have to use 2 tablespoons, nothing, don't vary from it or it'll mess up the recipe. This is a guide that gives an individual the ability to adapt and gain knowledge about, oh, that's a really cool idea. Let me apply it here. Even though the guide says go outside in a schoolyard, I've got a park, it'll work just fine. I know that's a simple example, but that's where I think the creativity of the educator has to be brought forth.
All right, here's another last question, I believe, unless anybody else adds any more questions. Is PLT program available for adult/college audience?
Oh, it's very applicable. There are no guides for college and beyond. I've used Project Learning Tree with adult learners very successfully. You just have to adapt it to those learners, to that age specific audience. And don't forget, content knowledge is really important. I've used an activity called Every Tree for Itself, which talks about forest management, but I can get a little deeper with college students here at the Warnell School and talk about silviculture, or, tending a forest from regeneration to harvest, and use terminology that's appropriate for that group. And that's the beauty of all 3 of these curricula, is that it's very adaptive. They are very adaptable to use across the board at all levels and all ages.
All right, well, thank you so much, Chris, for teaching us about environmental education today. I know I learned a lot. Even though I do some environmental education, this was great for me.
There's so much to it, and I appreciate everybody's time, taking the time to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about it and promote it. Get out there, get trained, be a part of this community of practice. That we have great materials. You don't have to know everything. It's all at your fingertips in the guides.
All right, thank you. And this is the last of our 5-part series. If you're interested in any of the other webinars, they will be on demand, recorded at Forestry Webinars. And with that, we are finished for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Stopping recording now.
All right,
Well,
Ingvar.